Empower Black men to live extraordinary lives. Shatter the stereotypes. Power Black men. Power Black men. Shatter the stereotypes. Power Black men to live extraordinary lives. Shatter the stereotypes. Shatter the stereotypes. Power Black men to live extraordinary lives.
Welcome to Shatter the Stereotypes, where the intention is to empower Black men to live extraordinary lives. This show is based on the simple idea that every Black man is capable of creating inner peace, dynamic health, great relationships, and financial abundance. Therefore, we provide insights and strategies to educate, motivate, and inspire Black men to reach their full potential and create the life of their dreams. So if you're ready for some high-octane motivation and inspiration that supports and empowers you to live the life you were born to live, get ready to shatter the stereotypes so you can build a life that lights you up and positively impacts the world. So now, let's shatter the stereotypes with your host, Coach Michael Taylor.
Hello and welcome to Shatter the Stereotypes, where my intention is to empower Black men to live extraordinary lives. So for the past few years, I've been engaging men in a conversation about personal growth and development. You see, it is my belief that every Black man is capable of creating an extraordinary life. And my goal is to provide them with the tools and resources to support them in doing so. And as I reflect back over the past few years, I've come to know that the most important conversations I have on the show are the ones in which we engage in a conversation about masculinity and men's emotional healing. So tonight, we're going to continue that conversation, and I have a very special guest who's going to share some insights and wisdom to support men in their emotional healing and transformation. Her name is Dr. Lashonda Green, and she is a licensed clinical psychologist. She's also a life coach, and she also holds an MBA. So talk about a powerful resume. So I'm really looking forward to diving in with her. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Green to the show. Hello, Dr. Green. How are you?
Hi, Coach Taylor. How are you? Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. Glad to have you on the show. So before we jump into your work, let's start off with a few icebreakers. So first of all, just tell us where you're from.
I am from the Garden State of New Jersey, originally from South Jersey, not to be confused with North Jersey. They essentially could be two different states. So I'm from the Metro Philadelphia area. North Jersey belongs to New York.
Okay. Now, tell us a little bit about your family, whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Well, I am currently a single mom of two beautiful chocolate muffins. They're 13 and 11, and I have a 23-year-old son who lives independently. And I have recently entered into a very healthy co-parenting situation, which started out quite tumultuous, but has grown and developed. So I'm proud of that. I'm proud of my growth, and I'm proud of his growth as a co-parents and individually. So that's wonderful. So I like to highlight that because I know when it wasn't so wonderful, I would herald that from the rooftop. So now that it is better, I like to make mention of that too. So we finally reached a healthy co-parenting situation. I have 3 kids. Yeah, and that's that. Oh, and I have brother and sister, and they're twins, boy and a girl. I'm 8 years older. I'm the oldest.
Oh, nice. Now, name a woman who's inspired you to be who you are.
Oh, wow. Well, it's a collective of women. My first true inspiration was actually a fictional character, Janie Crawford in Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God.
Oh, wow.
And she's not a real person, but her personality, her disposition, her philosophy, her drive, her brokenness, I related to, and while reading that novel, her resilience. So she was my first inspiration. That is the woman, albeit fictional, that she inspires me because she was a bundle of contradictions, and that didn't dissuade her from living life. And I like that level of authenticity. I like that kind of vulnerability. So that's what drew me to her.
Nice. So name a man that you look up to and admire.
Let's see. I really, really look up and admire to my uncle Spanky. You know, we all have in the color community nicknames. So his real name is Benjamin Franklin. Legitimately, his name is Benjamin Franklin Hill. And he was sort of my go-to person that I could ask questions about male and females. Not so much my dad, because my dad was uncomfortable with answering those types of questions. And he was reticent to delve in those types of conversations with me about sexuality, sex, relationship, romance. That wasn't his capacity. He just wasn't built that way. But I'm thankful that I had my Uncle Spanky, and who gave me the hard truth. He's like Kevin Samuels, actually.
Okay.
He's tough, he's suave, well educated, and he gave me some hard truths about men growing up that I think really helped me. And then I grew up with, and my father also helped me. I think I'm a product of good men. That's what makes me strong. I'm a product of good men.
Nice. Now, if you were to be trapped on an island for 30 days and you could only take one book with you, what book would you take?
What book would I take? I honestly would probably reread Their Eyes Were Watching God again. Because now I'm older, I'm more mature, I've had more tragedy, more triumph, more accolades, more failures. So my personality, my life as a human being is far more enriched. So I would view it with a different lens, a different experience. And yeah, I would reread Their Eyes Were Watching God. That's the one book that I would take.
Okay. Now, if I gave you a magic wand, and with this magic wand, you could create anything your heart desires, what would your life look like 5 years from now?
Oh, I would be Oprah 2.0.
Okay.
Yes, I think there's a space missing, and I don't want to recreate her, but I was just being, tongue in cheek. But I definitely think that I could handle and carry wholeheartedly my own talk show and bring to it a vivaciousness, a zest, an edge, but coupled with that, an intellect and information, refinement, an appreciation for the sciences in a way that's never really been communicated before. Because typically people in a reality world space, when it comes to psychologists, we tend to be like on reality shows and not necessarily in the expert roles. And we typically don't see minority experts in science paired enough together. So I want to really bring that association, and specifically for people of color, but essentially for everyone. I want to marry that image of being a double minority and having an appreciation for science, not folklore, not urban myths, not backyard fodder, like actual statistical analysis. There are Black scientists and researchers.
Absolutely. I could definitely see you pulling that off.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I can see you pulling that off. Now, there are some people who are pretty pessimistic about the future in general, while others are pretty optimistic about the future. So where do you fall on that spectrum between optimism and pessimism for the future in general?
Well, what I like to give myself and what I have learned in the practice of psychology, and also as a student, the greatest gift you can give yourself, especially as it pertains to an outlook and the emotional experience, is the gift of flexibility. I have range, right? So there's a thing called either or, black and white thinking, right? And so not having to choose between this or that, it's not sort of a dichotomous interpretation. I allow myself a range. So there may be times when I may be optimistic, and there'll be times when I'm generally pessimistic, but I'm not judging myself in either position. I'm allowing myself to experience emotions without guilt, without shame, without self-recrimination, without the shoulda, woulda, couldas, just living in the moment, accepting what it is, and moving forward. So depending, that's the psychologist's favorite word, right? It depends. So depending on the situation, I could be either. And I don't judge myself for being in either position.
Great viewpoint. Great viewpoint. So now I want to give an opportunity to introduce yourself professionally. So tell the audience who you are and what you do.
I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm licensed here in the state of New Jersey. I graduated from an APA accredited doctoral program in clinical psychology from LaSalle University in Philadelphia, PA. I matched and I completed my doctoral internship at the Kentucky Department of Corrections. And successfully completed that in September of 2013. And then I became fully licensed as a national exam that we all have to take, and which was truly horrendous. Passed that in 2018. So I've been fully licensed to practice independently as a licensed clinical psychologist since 2018. So 4 years official. Okay. So I've worked in terms of my clinical experience. At this point in my career, I've worked across the lifespan. I've worked with adolescents, I work with teenagers, I work with young adults, middle age, and now currently I'm doing some geriatric consulting. So I've worked across the lifespan, and that really has afforded me to really experience various psychological phenomena at different stages of life, in conjunction with different ethnicities, different genders, different religions. So it's definitely been a very full and rich experience working across the lifespan.
Nice. Now, I'm curious, when did you know, or when did you decide you want to become a psychologist?
Well, this was never my plan. I got to tell you, this was sprung upon me. So I was on a path, right? I originally I've always had this sort of investigative, journalistic interviewing style. I've always been sort of a muckraker. I like information. I love information. I love research. I like I said, investigation. I like people, like asking questions. So I thought I would find myself in the world of business. And so that's what I did. I got my undergrad in marketing. Then I went and pursued my MBA from an accredited business school at Rutgers. And my accredited MBA came from LaSalle. And I said, oh, this is my plan. I have an MBA. I'm going to go take over the world. No, not take over the world, but close. I was like, I'm going to be the next CEO of something. And I always envisioned myself as having a large impact in the world. That I have always known from a young child. Somehow I was going to affect the world. I just thought it was going to be in the way that I envisioned it. But then I realized this MBA stuff is very numbers based. It's very just increased shareholder value. That was the mantra. You really weren't moving anything there. I had big dreams. I was philosophical. I had theories, ideas, plans, programs. I had all the, and it was just, your job as the MBA is to increase shareholder value. I said, well, this can't be enough. It was insufficient. It was inadequate. So I prayed. I am a believer. I said, Lord, is this it? I was like, are we on the right path? And then I said, let me actually be quiet after the prayer. That's the key, right? You pray and then you actually have to be quiet. So then I got to listening, and then he put in my spirit and led me to pursue the psychology program at LaSalle, where I got my MBA. So I got my MBA and my PsyD at LaSalle. So really, if I hadn't really pursued my MBA, I don't think I would have had the proximity to even consider that I would be eligible or worthy enough to pursue my PsyD. So I said, listen, I said, Lord, I said, clearly it's not me, you mean. You know what I mean? This psychologist, I like people, I can take them, I dig them, but enough to sit and avail myself to what causes them to be weary? Maybe not. Then I applied and got in. I was like, oh, so this is a yes. And then when I would want to quit and I had some financial troubles, oh, then he was like, no, you're staying right here. Boop, and would bless me with something. And then one day it was, I got to tell the story. It was the spring of 2007. And I was done, right? Because I went and to pursue a doctorate at the doctorate level. Like I had no psychology undergrad degree. And a lot of people who get doctorates have undergrad psychology degrees. So I was changing industries, changing philosophies, changing models at the doctoral level. So I had done a full year. I said, I was so resolute. I was like, this is not for me. I said, I hate this. I said, oh, wow. You got the wrong woman. It's not me. So my mom told me, hey, listen, come with me to Florida. We went to York City, Florida, and Paula White was having a conference. Paula White is a evangelical who has probably since fallen out of, well, we won't get into that, but Donnie McClurkin was there. And Paula White. Now I was sitting in the nosebleed section. I was like, oh my God, that's it. I said, I'm done. I'm done. I'm not even here to hear. I'm just here to tell God I'm done. And this is to wipe my hands of it. This is a horrible idea. So there was a prayer. We all stood up and we prayed, right? Okay. We sit back down. Next to my mom, there was an older woman. And I was mad at God. I was like, you wasted my time. I was hype. I thought this was going to be easy. You said you would open doors. This woman reached over my mom and she said, excuse me. She said, are you in school? Or are you in a program? I've never seen this woman. She said, are you in a program? I said, yes. She said, the Lord told me to tell you, you must not stop. You have to continue.
Oh, wow. That's a divine incident.
That's what I was, and my mom started crying. I was like, I said, Mom, you, and I know my mom, I mean, we were in a nosebleed section. And so that moment kept me committed to the program, because when I tell you there was adversity, and then we saw her again. And she also said, it will be hard. And the Lord told me, he said, it's going to be hard, but not to quit. Wow. And boy, did he live up to what he said.
What a great story.
So that's how I knew that I am supposed to be where I am, because he knew, God knows his children. He knew I was done. He knew I was done. But of course, you know, he sees the end from the beginning, and he knew that there was work to be done. So yeah, it's because that moment in New York City at the Paula White and Donnie McClurkin conference is when he was like, this is the path.
There you go.
So that's why.
So tonight we're going to be talking about men's emotional healing. Now,
yes.
As a female psychologist, what do you think about when you hear those words, men's emotional healing? What comes to mind for you?
I love it. I've facilitated men's group in a forensic setting. And on one hand, I get very excited because personally I've experienced a therapeutic exchange and atmosphere, about 8 to 10 men. And when men actually develop a rhythm, a trust, and they begin to put the defenses down and open up, when men emote, right, in the therapeutic setting, it is palpable and it is earth moving. And it's, on one hand, I get discouraged because I'm like, if only, you know, brothers out here knew just how enriching, just how life-changing. I mean, it gotten to the point where the groups I have facilitated, they were working with themselves or worked with each other before me, and they could literally run the group by themselves. I mean, the transparency, the vulnerability, the accountability, the self-reflection, the metacognitive abilities, and that's when you learn to think about thinking, which is not a natural skill. It's when you have to acquire all of that, considering information that goes against what you believe. Men, when they are in a therapeutic setting and there's trust, oh, it's powerful.
Oh
And
yeah.
it works. It
Yeah.
works.
Yeah, definitely can
It
relate
works.
to that with the work that I've been doing for the last 20 years. Now,
Yeah.
I know in the Black community, there can be a hesitancy to go to therapy. And some of it stems from cultural upbringing. Some could be contributed to religious beliefs, and some could even be racial. So what are your thoughts about what may be keeping Black men from going to therapy?
Well, I think they're embarrassed. And it's this issue, which is largely Western culture. We've really bought into this idea of uniqueness to a degree that the Eastern part of the world doesn't necessarily. We really buy into this idea of being so individualized that we each are so unique, and it's very Western. And it works against us because in that regard, we've really convinced ourselves that our problems are super unique and no one could possibly understand, fathom, relate, or empathize to my experience. And that couldn't be the farthest from the truth. But it's because we have spent money, investment dollars, pushing this "you are so super unique and special" narrative, not realizing that there is a downside to that message. There's a downside to that whole unique schema because you are an island and no one can get to you. If you truly think you are an island, then how are you accessible? And so when you really buy into that uniqueness message, I'm so special, you really cut off your accessibility. No one can reach you. And it makes it difficult in a therapy setting. So it's like, well, if no one can reach me, no one can see me, well, then what would be the point in going?
Yeah. Now, it's been said that at the core of all addictive behaviors is some unresolved emotional conflict. So can you talk to us about the importance of being in touch with your emotions and your feelings?
Well, self-awareness, I posted this the other day, is a superpower, okay? Being able to identify a feeling is paramount to being able to experience a feeling. Once you name it, you can then mold it, you can yield it, you can have more influence. You can't influence what you can't name and identify. Then it becomes this nebulous cloud of a thing. What are you talking about? So it's highly unlikely for anybody to be able to manage something that you don't know. That's impossible, right? So being able to identify and actually name a feeling, most people can't do. If I say, how do you feel? Well, I think that it's not a feeling.
Right.
It's a thought. Wait, no, I just told you how I felt. No, you did not. You told me a thought. And so it's very critical for people to make the distinction because, see, when I disagree with you, I can disagree with, like, the couch. Oh, you think it's red. Oh, okay, that's great. I think it's like a burnt orange. It's like pumpkin. We can disagree. If you say, I'm sad when I look at the couch, well, I can disagree with that. I can disagree with that. That's a subjective experience. Even though your thought is subjective, emotions are not really arguable. Thinking rather is. I can present logic. I can correct that. I can provide evidence to refute that. But what you feel in terms of your feelings, that's something that I will have less capacity to do so. And so when people don't make the distinction between thoughts and feelings and they kind of mold them in one, when you disagree with them, they're triggered because what they are actually responding to is that they think you are being opposed to what they feel. Right. And then they get, oh, you don't understand me. No, I clearly understand you. I'm disagreeing with what you're thinking, not how you're feeling. I see clearly that you're upset, but I disagree with the thought that led to that emotion. Those are two different positions I can hold.
Yeah.
So it's
Now,
really critical.
Yeah. And again, I think as men collectively, I wrote a book called A New Conversation with Men. And in the book, I identify what I call the 5 illusions of manhood. And
Okay.
the first illusion is that to be a man, you must be non-emotional and disconnected. So we live in a society and culture that has conditioned men to believe that feelings are for women,
Right.
that men aren't supposed to feel. And so what we do is
Mhm.
we start suppressing, repressing, and denying our feelings from a very
Mhm.
early age. And
Very
so
early.
we start becoming emotionally constipated in a way. We don't know how to
Yeah.
identify the
It
feelings.
gets stuck. Yes.
Yeah, so we get stuck. So it's important for us, and that's why I do, one of the reasons I do this show is because
Mhm.
sometimes it's just a matter of being exposed to some information that gives you a different way to think,
Mhm.
to see things. And talking about emotions, that's a huge stretch for men.
Mhm.
And the good news is, I've been doing this work for 20, 25 years now. The good news is, right now, though, there's a lot of emphasis and focus on mental health.
Right.
People are talking about mental health differently now, which I think is good. But I
Yeah.
personally make a distinction between mental health and emotional health, because
Okay.
I see emotional health as the energy that moves through our bodies, right? So
Okay.
if we can't identify those energies that are moving through our bodies, then in some ways we're disconnected from those energies. So
Yes.
how do you see that emotional map, if you will, inside of us, being able to identify those energies and
Mhm.
expressing them?
Well, I am what they call a cognitive behaviorally trained therapist.
Okay.
And so that means that the guiding principles for my curriculum were centered around Ellis and Aaron Beck. So I have come, Pennsylvania is the land of Aaron Beck. It's cognitive therapy, cognitive therapy, cognitive therapy. Um, the most contemporary therapy is the third wave, which is acceptance. So currently we're in acceptance theories, but prior to that was the cognitive wave. Prior to that was behavioral. So we're currently in the cognitive behavioral / acceptance wave. And so cognitive behavioral therapy trains the clinician to understand the trifold dynamic between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, right? And every thought has a feeling and every feeling has a behavior, those three. So if you want to alter a person's feelings, right? And the general understanding of the model, it's a triangle. And at each triangle, there's a thought, there's a feeling, and a behavior. And the relationships between each of the three constructs is bidirectional. So thoughts impact feelings, feelings impact thoughts, thoughts impact behaviors, behaviors impact thoughts. And so the general understanding is you can intervene at either one of those three, and you would ultimately affect the whole entire triangle, right? So essentially, if I wanted you or a person to affect their emotions, or I wanted to get at how a person arrived at an emotion, I would work with, well, what were you thinking? Per every feeling, ideally, there is attached to a belief, an attitude, a mentality, a schema, a narrative, a philosophy, and an ideology. Drives feelings, feelings then drive behaviors. Then it works conversely. Well, I don't, if the person doesn't have that much insight, there's a behavior. Where did it come from? So that's how we understand contemporary psychologists specifically, not Freudian, which is psychoanalytic. We understand behavior, emotions, and thoughts from what they call a CBT model, cognitive behavioral therapy, which encompasses the relationships between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Did I answer the question?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm clear. I'm clear now. My audience may be a little confused, but I
Oh,
got it. I'm
okay. What I need to fix? Because I
no,
can
no, no, no,
fix
no.
it.
You're good, because that's going to lead me to my next question.
Okay.
So we have these models of understanding human behavior.
Right.
So let's talk about trauma and what trauma is. And based on what you just said about thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, it's like the trauma. Oh, first of all, how would you define trauma? Because there's different types of trauma. So how would you define trauma? Let's start there.
Well, of course, I would always go to the DSM, right? Because that's my diagnostic and statistical manual. That's our Bible for the
Okay.
profession for psychiatry and psychology. And it's typically an external event that you either witness or that you experience firsthand. That's the criteria to actually be diagnosed with PTSD is quite extensive. It is
Okay.
very extensive, right? It's very specific, the time frame, what you have to witness, what you have to experience. So it's typically an external event that you either witnessed or experienced. That's a trauma that
Okay.
causes a set of following behaviors: disassociation, nightmares, re-experiencing depression, anxiety, things of that nature.
Okay. So within the Black community, I noticed that there is a hesitancy to talk about the impact of trauma. And so looking at it from a clinical psychologist standpoint,
Mhm.
I believe, and this is Michael Taylor's belief. I'm not a psychologist,
Sure.
okay? I'm a coach. But I believe the most important time in a child's life is birth to 7.
Right.
And so when a child experiences trauma, be it physical, emotional, psychological, sexual, those traumas create an energy inside, a negative. I'll call it a negative, and not good or bad, but just what I'll call a negative energy inside. If we have the tools to heal those energies, we can release them and be free from them. But I think what happens too many times is we have these traumas and we suppress, repress, and deny the trauma because that's the defense mechanism we have to deal with the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But my point is, as a community, one of the things that I've bumped up against for the last 20 years is talking about how we raise our kids and the impact that trauma has on their psyches.
Yes.
So can you just touch base on the importance of understanding you can't scream and cuss at and beat on your child and expect them to be emotionally healthy, because that's trauma. So can you
trauma is definitely part of the African American experience here in the United States from many different facets. And there are a great number of us who've actually experienced complex trauma. And complex trauma is chronic and repeated trauma. So there's the neighborhood violence, there's trauma in the home, there's the trauma, and trauma in the home may be either an abuse or neglect. There may be sexual assault trauma. There may be trauma experienced from an encounter with the police. So people of color specifically, our likelihood for being exposed to not just one trauma, but complex trauma, right, is highly likely. And it is very important that the first 7 years, ideally in the perfect world, be trauma-free, right? Because we call that the imprinting years, right? So a wonderful researcher, Dr. John Briere, is a trauma guru, and he did a series of studies and went to a conference visit. He looked at and research really points to this also, that 0 to 7 are the years where if you don't get certain things, certain nurturing things, if certain healthy behaviors are not modeled for you, you are less than likely to develop maybe certain adaptive behaviors. This is very true. One other interesting finding that he discovered in the age group from 0 to 7 was that neglect actually had more deleterious effects than abuse. Because the brain, humans, children, the brain absolutely needs attention, affirming, verbal exchanges, touching, engagement. Certain parts of the brain must be activated on a regular basis, especially the prefrontal cortex, so that certain abilities like your executive functioning can develop in a very healthy way. So I've always remembered that in certain cases, neglect can even be worse than abuse. But back to your point, of course, chronic and repeated abuse is trauma, but trauma definitely can impact the way people develop. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
How they respond, how they see the world, how they respond to pressure, how they respond to triggers that remind them of that trauma. Oh, it's very expansive.
Yeah. Now, are you familiar with a guy named Gabor Mate?
No.
Gabor, Gabor, Mate, Gabor Mate.
I can be familiar. Yes. So I need to be familiar with this gentleman.
Well, he's one of the leading, I'll call him, voices in the trauma healing community. He did a really amazing movie called The Wisdom of Trauma.
Okay.
But really powerful guy. And again, world-renowned author and speaker, but he has a unique way of bringing trauma to the conversation so people can grasp. Because speaking from my own experience, when I was in my 30s, I was living the American dream. I had the house, the wife, the 2.5 kids, and all of that.
Right.
And I didn't recognize the impact that my traumatic childhood was having on my life as an adult. Okay. So it wasn't until after my divorce, my bankruptcy, foreclosure, again, trauma,
right.
that I had to be willing to start examining some of the origins of my behavior. But what I learned was the reason that I had been so successful at a very early age is I was driven by this deep-rooted shame. Okay, it was this fear of not being liked, that if I succeeded enough, people would like me. So there was this drive that I had that was driven by trauma.
Yes.
But he's got a unique way of allowing people to see that yes, trauma is painful and difficult, but we can heal from it, we can grow from it. And if we're willing to look deeply enough, we can also find the gift in it. The gift in trauma, which again, a lot of people may struggle with, but for me, again, I possibly had the worst childhood a person could have from age 6 to 13, every imaginable type of abuse.
Right.
And yet now, as a result of my own healing and growth and transformation, what I can see is as painful and as difficult as those experiences were, they actually shaped me into the man that I am today.
Yes.
The reason why I am so empathetic, so compassionate, because I know what it's like to be in those situations, and I do all I can to keep people from being there. I try to help heal that. So it's amazing. He's a really amazing guy. I think you'd really like him.
I've got to check him out for sure.
Just a brilliant guy, and his entire focus is on trauma and healing it and growing from it and so forth. So with that being said, I want to now jump into the recent event that occurred on national television.
Yes, the slap that was heard around the world.
The slap that was heard around the world. Now, again, the intention here is to use this as a teaching moment. So for all the brothers who are watching this, I want you to really pay attention to what we're going to talk about, because this isn't about right or wrong, who was right, who was wrong. But I want to try to kind of go a little bit deeper into the cause, if you will, of why. So Dr. Green, I'm wondering if first and foremost, as a psychologist, what did you see?
What did my eyes see?
Yeah, when you saw that event.
When I saw it replay, the next day, I did see Will Smith slap Chris Rock. I saw Chris Rock say, "Hey, I heard him say, Will Smith just slapped the shit out of me." He went back to his seat and the show commenced. It resumed. All was well with the world.
In your professional opinion, what do you think drove Will to do what he did?
Off the bat, no single variable. And lay people tend to want a single factor when understanding behavior that is difficult to understand, shocking to absorb, really a blow to what you think you know about a person. it's very common to want to identify a single variable, right? Because that's easy to manage. If it's one thing, I can fix the one thing. I can control for the one thing. I can avoid that one thing. It's not one thing. It's never one thing in psychology. It's never one thing in the experience of the human condition. It is a mix. It's many variables, right? How many? I don't know. We didn't do a test. It's not, it's more than one. And then the second question is, well, to what degree? Because let's say there were 4 variables. Well, each variable didn't have 100% impact on the behavior, right? So it's not one variable. There are multiple variables, and each variable impacted Will Smith to varying degrees. It is that multifaceted.
Okay. So here's Michael Taylor's take on it. And again, I am not a psychologist. I am a coach. I am an author. I've written several books dealing with masculinity. And this is just something how I saw it. I believe that there is always a buildup to a blow up. And here's what I mean by that. The buildup comes from Will having to deal with a lot of, I mean, if you look at the situation with him and his wife and the affair and all of that, and I mean, the poor guy, he's in some ways, I'm sure he was embarrassed, he was ashamed when all of that happened. So my interpretation of it is that there is so much unresolved emotional stuff between him and his wife that for him, the last straw, if you will, was the joke. But I don't think the joke really had anything to do with his behavior. I believe his behavior was driven by the buildup, what you call the variables. So there was so many things, and still, in my opinion, so many unresolved things that he has going on between him and his wife, that this was just an opportunity to, in some ways, try to save face by saying he was defending her. But in reality, it's just unresolved stuff that he and his wife haven't worked through. This is just my interpretation of it, that the blow up was the result of the buildup. And we're talking years of stuff that, they go through. So I think for us as men, what happens is, because a lot of us don't have the emotional tools to genuinely and authentically identify whatever feelings that we have. So what we do is we go to the default for most men, which is anger.
Right. Okay.
Rather than say, I was hurt when I heard about the affair, I was sad, because I say underneath most anger is really fear and sadness, but it's expressed as anger because that's socially accepted for men.
Of course, yes.
So I'm saying all this to say that as men, it's important for us to recognize, if we don't have the tools to express authentically the real feelings, then it's going to come out what we call sideways, and it may come up in blow-ups like Will Smith.
Absolutely. There's nothing in what we call, if you don't work on that unresolved stuff, you won't then develop tools to your coping skills repertoire. You got no tools in your toolbox, right? And being able to manage negative emotions is a skill set. Skills are acquired over time and they get better with practice, right? It's not something you are innately born with. Being able to sit with a strong negative emotion, fear, rejection, rage, sadness, angst, to be able to sit and be regulated and composed and present is a skill set that must be acquired in a professional setting. You can't manifest it. It's not going to descend on you. It's not going to arrive in the mail. You have to work it. First, you have to learn it. Then you have to work it. Then you have to practice it. It only comes through professional engagement with someone who's licensed, experienced, and has the knowledge to communicate. It is a skill set, right? And so why is that? Because behaviorally, right, according to the behaviorists, right, that predominated psychology years ago, You heard of the Pavlovian conditioning, the dogs that salivated, right? So at our core, we are all animals. We are just animals at the top of the food chain. We like to forget that we are animals, right? Humans at our core are animals. We just happen to be at the top of the food chain, right? And so typically, for most animals, the way they respond, how their responsivity is developed, something happens, which we call a stimulus, aka a trigger, and then you respond. So it goes like this: something happens, which is a trigger or stimulus, people respond. In the animal kingdom, trigger, stimulus, response. It happens so quickly, it feels like one sweeping motion. It gets to the point where the two are the same construct and they happen simultaneously. Now we take that same theory to a human being. There's a trigger. You call me a bitch. I curse you out. It's one motion, right? It's one motion. There's a trigger of being called an offensive term, and there's my response. And my response is to call you one back or possibly strike out at you, right? One sweeping emotion. That's where we get oh, they snapped, it was impulsive. But what separates us from the wild kingdom? Our ability to reason. We have executive functioning. That's what separates us from animals in the wild, right? So we have the ability to strategize, to plan ahead, to self-reflect, to self-evaluate, to think about our thoughts. Animals do not possess that sort of thinking. They don't have it. So what therapy teaches people, right? There's a space between being calling a bitch and me responding to the woman who called me that. There is a space. And in that space, I have the freedom to choose how I want to respond. And in my choosing, I am weighing out my consequences, right? In that space between stimulus, the name calling, and me responding, I'm in this middle space. I'm thinking, well, if I respond to her, I'm at the workplace, I possibly could get fired. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my benefits in 30 days. Whatever. You start weighing the consequences of your decisions. Then you say, well, I can smack her back, then she won't do it again. You start weighing that option. Now, this goes very quickly, right? And so that's why when it goes quickly, you have to know what's important to you. That's why you got to know your value system, okay? Because if you got nothing on the line and nothing to lose, well, that's just, it's a waste of time. You're not going to take the time to go through all of that thinking. And so in this space between the insult and my response, I get to determine what is my desired outcome. I want to remain employed. Therefore, I will not respond in kind. Therefore, I will likely walk away. Then you start to think with the end in mind, back to the beginning, also very specific to human beings. When you are emotionally mature, you've done the work, you've grown in self-awareness, you can self-evaluate, that space between the stimulus and the response becomes more expansive and more chock full of coping skills. Your ability to self-reflect and to think and weigh the future and engage in risk versus reward, cost benefit analysis. That's where that is. What is this going to cost me? What is the benefit of this particular action? That's where the cost benefit analysis happens. That's where the risk versus reward. What happened on the stage, Will Smith didn't exercise that space. There was no cost benefit analysis. There was no thinking down the line. What are the consequences? It was one sweeping emotion, right? Stimulus, response. And the reason why that space in between the triggering of the joke and his slapping, the reason why that space was so narrow is because it's been, like you said, he's been inundated, crowded by negative emotion, way down. And negative emotions not dealt with, they do feel like actual physical weights, right? Unresolved emotion, they do have you can experience them physiologically. So he likely did, you feel weighed and sullen, and your soul feels weary, and you're tired, and you're drained, and your coping is really on a thread. And so then, like you said, when you've not addressed your weariness, being emotionally spent, pouring from an empty cup, not doing the work of allowing your needs to be met. And then when you have all of that and you arrive at this moment, you really don't have the cognitive capacity to engage in all that risk versus reward, cost benefit analysis. Because at this moment, now you're just as primitive as somebody in the wall. It's about survival.
Right. Right.
And that's what humans do best. Above all else, our organism will teach us you must survive. It is very instinctive. And so in that moment, there was nothing to do but survive the moment. Yeah. And Will smacking Chris was his attempt to survive the moment, to survive the fact that he has been struggling on E, empty, downtrodden, sullen, melancholy, spent, and been pouring from an empty cup. And I think what most people are struggling with is the ideology, the idealism that one man can make such a bad decision and alter the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And that's a very powerful thing.
Yeah. And the point that I want to make here, and I think this is, we live in a culture and society that idolizes celebrities as though they are somehow different than us.
Yes.
The fact is that as human beings, we all feel the same emotions. We all have the same types of responses. So it's, because I heard one guy was saying, well, he's a multimillionaire, he should know better, or something like that, he said. But that has nothing to do with it. The energies and feelings that we have as human beings transcend your social status.
Yeah, they have no immunity. There's no immunity there because you're rich.
Exactly. So my point here is for you as you're watching this, I just want you to recognize that if we don't have the emotional tools to deal with the feelings that we have, then we end up having these types of events. Right. So what I'm suggesting is that we become willing and open to gaining some tools to keep us from being in that situation. So one thing that I'm a firm believer in is the power of meditation. And
absolutely.
The power of breathing. Now, you mentioned that in a therapeutic setting, you have someone that can facilitate you through that, which is extremely important. Yes. But I've also come to know that in learning how to meditate and breathe, I can create that gap between the stimulus and my action.
Yes, you can.
I can stop before I react. I can pause. And that's a really powerful tool.
It's superhuman. Yes, it's a powerful tool.
And it's not easy to do now. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, no.
Because this is again, something I've been doing.
It's hard.
I've been doing for years, and I coach people on this. But the point here is that you, as you're watching this, you can gain the skill to create that space between the stimulus and your reaction.
You absolutely can. Yes. It can become wider. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's where the control is, not externally. That's where you exert the most influence when it comes to how you interact with the world. Your ability to choose, your ability to plan, that's where you exert the most control. Not anywhere else. You get to decide how you respond, and that is the strength.
Because we have to understand that emotional energy will override or can override rational thinking.
Oh, absolutely.
If you're in enough pain,
absolutely.
You can't, in some cases, you can't think about, like you said, the consequences of your actions. All you're doing is reacting from that pain.
Yes.
that anger, that hurt, whatever that is. So you can't say, oh, if I do this, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
So once again,
because you're in the throes. Go ahead.
So what it is, it's about gaining the awareness to create that gap. You may not be able to think the whole thing through, but you can pause just long enough.
Yes. Yes.
Just long enough that you don't react. And
yes.
it is in that pausing that change can occur. So with that being said, though, Dr. Green, I want you to just kind of, again, breathing and meditation is some tools that I, teach. What other things can you suggest, or other than, you talked about therapy and the importance of being in a situation where you can learn these things, but just, are there some things you can share that might help the viewer now to kind of think about how not to react to those stimuluses?
Well, let me piggyback off the importance of meditation and yoga. It is super, super important. And the reason why it is because it's a huge physiological science, right, behind it. Because when people are activated and they're scared and there's a threat, whether real or imagined, right? So the threat can either be actually existing or in the reality, or the person can perceive it as a threat, right? And so when a person is activated, the sympathetic nervous system is flowing. It's human nature, right? So the adrenaline is rushing and blood is rushing to your extremities and your body's preparing to encounter a threat. So that's why the angst and the rapid heartbeat and the sweating, that's why all of that occurs, because it's a natural response to a threat. Because if somebody was legitimately running after you, you would normally run faster than you would any other time, right? So it naturally happens. So the yoga and the meditation, the deep breathing, what it does is you are slowing down your heart rate and you are activating what we call the parasympathetic nervous system. You are telling the body physiologically, there's no threat here. I don't have to lift up a truck and throw it. I don't have to run. Nobody's chasing me right now. This is an exchange of words, right? So you are taking control of the physiological response of that. And the way you do that is the breathing. Slow down your heart rate, the blood stops rushing, and you actually feel all of that pulsating, it dials it down. So being able to do that really, really is helpful. Seeing a professional is a must these days. It is the new sexy, and I would highly recommend people doing that. It is important. It is important. People underestimate the benefit of and not being afraid to fire some people. Sometimes you have to clean house, right? While you're actually growing in the process. Don't be afraid to fire people in your life. Don't be afraid. And some people may not need to be fired, but they definitely need to be repositioned. So don't be afraid to do some restructuring in your personal life. Those people that are not healthy, that are not helpful to the cause, to your personal growth, they move them folks to the back of the line. Don't be afraid. Get in there, put sweat equity, and move some things around. We call it an environmental restructuring. That's what I believe in.
There you go. Now, another thing that's been really helpful for me is journaling. Journaling gives me an opportunity to self-reflect, challenge my beliefs and assumptions about myself and the world around me. In your opinion, how important is journaling as a tool?
I think journaling is very helpful in terms of it is cathartic. But before you journal, it is also important to be able to develop the skill set in identifying thoughts that are unhealthy. There are certain classes of thoughts, certain types of thoughts. We call it stinking thinking, right? So there's certain types of cognitive errors that we are all prone to, and they really inundate the types of thinking that we have. Our thoughts, we have thousands and thousands and thousands of thoughts per day. While journaling is cathartic, it's almost like venting on paper, the real help comes in, okay, I've noticed that that's an example of catastrophic thinking. I noticed that that's denial. Oh, I see there that that's minimization. Oh, there's justification. Oh, that's polarized thinking. So after journaling, being able to have the skill set in identifying the thinking errors. And when you go look at the thinking errors, okay, I noticed that when I use justification and minimization, I'm invalidating others, particularly my wife. I'm noticing that when she feels invalidated, it impacts sex, which impacts intimacy. Then you go on, then you start to see the pattern. I notice that when I'm in denial, that separates me from others. And then that impacts my self-awareness. And it makes other people very difficult in getting to know me. So there is a whole purpose behind not just looking at a thought and saying that's what it is, but now let's attach certain behaviors and thoughts and feelings that go along with these thoughts that you're journaling. And that's where the change can occur.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's so powerful. So in terms of men, and especially Black men, is my belief that this is the most important work that a lot of us are afraid to do.
Yes.
It is being willing to stop looking out there and start looking in here, in our own hearts, our own minds, to figure out what it is that drives our behavior. Because we, as men who happen to be Black, we deal with all the same emotional feelings and traumas and everything as any other human being. Yeah. But this show is dedicated to brothers who are committed to their own personal growth. And so my hope is that this conversation has kind of opened your mind a little to the importance of our emotional healing, because emotional healing is everything. And not just emotional healing, but emotional awareness. Because everything we do, believe it or not, we do it in an attempt to feel something. We do it in an attempt to feel something. And what we want to feel is we want to feel good.
We do. We all, yes, very human.
Yeah, it's just human nature. So what I want you to do is I want you to feel good, but authentically good. Not good like, okay, I'm gonna go drink a 6-pack and feel good, but authentically feel good in your body. And being in touch with your emotions. And it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight, but it is a process and it is available to you. But you have to be willing to do the work. That's what this is. It's a work. And the work, in my opinion, is an ongoing process. There's really no destination to get to. That's just this amazing journey that we should be on to constantly feel our best, to be connected to our authentic selves. That's where the joy comes from. That's where the passion comes from. And that's what I want for you. I want you to experience that because it's possible for you, but you got to be willing to do the work. So Dr. Green, I just want to give you an opportunity now to share your final. Well, first of all, how can people find you if they want to learn more about what you do?
I am on Instagram at Dr. Lashonda, DrLashonda. I'm on Instagram. I'm on TikTok as Dr. Lashonda T. Green. I'm on Facebook as Dr. Lashonda T. Green. So I'm out there. Again, it's Instagram, IG, DrLashonda. They can get to me that way. Okay.
And which is your primary, because I'll put a link below the video. Which would you like me to connect it to? Instagram or?
Yeah, Instagram.
Instagram's okay. So I'll put the link to your Instagram page below this video, below this interview. So great.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, so with that being said, now I want to give you an opportunity as we close to share your final thoughts, whatever's on your heart or mind to share.
Well, I do want to say that it's unfair, but even though you are a victim, for the brothers out there, you might have been a victim of trauma, complex trauma, treated unfairly, marginalized, persecuted, ostracized. And I see you and I hear you, and I understand that those are real experiences. And the unfair part about that is even yet, the responsibility is still yours to begin the healing, that no one is coming to save you. No one is coming. No one is coming. And that even though you've been victimized and you've been bullied and neglected and abused, it is still your responsibility. The greatest act of self-love you can give yourself is doing the work towards wholeness. And it's not a destination. There's no, aha, I've arrived, and there are no cures, right? But there is improvement in the quality of life. There's improvement in the types of thinking, the types of thoughts. There are improvements in the types of decisions that we make. There are improvements to be made, and that's what it's all about, striving for improvement, not necessarily meeting a sort of destination, but just refining, honing the process of living in a way that's adaptive and conducive to living the value-driven life that you want for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'll just reiterate, we know that you can't avoid being victimized. As a human being, you're going to be victimized in some way, but you get to choose whether or not you remain a victim.
You do.
So don't remain a victim. Take responsibility for your life. Yes, there's a lot of external things that are going on out there. We all know what they are, but you have the power. You have the power within you. I am absolutely certain of it. I'm living proof of it, to create an extraordinary life, but you've got to be willing to do the work.
Yes.
It's really that simple. You have to be willing to do the work, and the work is an inner journey to discover and wake up to who you truly are. And my wish for you is that you begin that journey. Find that place within yourself where you feel whole, complete. And Dr. Green, I love what you said about self-love. As Black men, we have to embrace self-love. We have to understand that it's not feminine. It's not something that just women do. We have to embrace self-love, because self-love is really about, our healing is really about getting to a place of self-love.
Absolutely.
When you heal your heart, when you heal your mind, you get to a place of self-love to know who you are. And that's when life becomes magical. And that's my want for you, to experience life as magical. And that's why I do this show. So again, I want to thank everybody. Dr. Green, again, thank you so much for sharing an hour or so with us. We really appreciate your info and insights. And I look forward to future collaboration. So
absolutely. I loved it. Thank you.
So again, this has been another episode of Shatter the Stereotypes. And I'm going to leave you with that thought. You cannot go through life without being victimized, but you don't have to remain a victim. That's your choice. Choose not to be a victim. We'll see you next episode.